This was the largest-scale naval battle to date. You can't imagine that in Europe 1,200 years ago, the clever Vikings had already developed a prototype of an aircraft carrier. This mini-carrier was made of wooden barrels and fences, driven by the manpower of 3 warships rowing. Each carrier was fully loaded with Viking warriors and siege equipment. A total of 5,000 Viking warriors advanced grandly towards the city of Paris. The Parisians also refused to show weakness. They took the initiative to leave the city to meet the enemy, deciding to deliver a head-on blow to the Vikings on the Seine River. Rollo was seen sitting calmly at the bow. The 5,000 Marines behind him also had the look of being well-trained. Ragnar never imagined Rollo would actually train an army of such scale in such a short time, but the arrow had left the bow. There was no turning back. Both sides successively entered battle mode, accompanied by the Vikings blowing the war horn. This battle of the Seine River that would go down in history officially began.
Front line! Advance!
Rollo ordered the vanguard to launch the first attack. As the ships gradually approached, the Vikings fired volleys of rockets, trying to set the warships on fire and stop the impact of the enemy's vanguard. But the Parisians all had iron shields and iron warships. The rockets couldn't cause large-scale damage to them at all. In the gap between the crisscrossing arrows, Rollo's vanguard ships had already rushed to the front. They threw out grappling hooks, trying to board the carrier. The two sides quickly engaged in close-quarters melee combat. The advantages of aircraft carriers began to manifest. Like on land, the Vikings were able to rapidly gather their forces and unleash effective sniping against the Parisians attempting to board their ships. Even if a small number of people boarded the combat platform, they would be surrounded and hacked to death by the Vikings. Before long, the Parisians were retreating one after another. After a fierce battle, the frightened Parisians turned their ships around and returned to their own ranks. The deputy suggested to Rollo to withdraw. With the enemy's morale high now, it would be better for them to return and regroup before fighting another day. Rollo came up to the deputy without a word. The next second, he directly took out his sword and stabbed this person who was disturbing morale to death in front of everyone.
All of my life, and all of your lives, have come to this point. There is nowhere else to be but here. Nowhere else to live or die but here. To be here now is the only thing that matters.
In Rollo's dictionary, there was never any talk of retreat, either win or die. This spirit of viewing death as a return home was precisely the source of the Vikings' strength. Rollo's speech made the Parisian soldiers realize that retreating one step was a dead end. Only by defeating the Vikings could they have a way out. The strong desire to survive made them charge fearlessly towards the opposite side. Seeing the enemy killing their way over with a fierce aura, Ragnar took the last opium pill. He had waited too long for this moment. In his subconscious, even if they lost this war, the Rollo who betrayed him and his people must die.
Faster! Row! Row! Faster! Row! Row!
Although the carrier could accommodate a large number of people, the iron ships coming at full speed would cause the wooden carrier to shake violently. It was precisely in the gap when the Vikings lost their balance that the Parisian soldiers all climbed onto the combat platform. The two sides once again fell into close-quarters melee combat. All the Vikings were engaged in battle. Only Ragnar stared at Rollo on the opposite side without moving, his eyes wide with anger. Rollo now also had things he wanted to protect. For his wife, for power and glory. He could betray everything, of course including his own people and elder brother. They rushed towards each other at the same time. The fierce collision of two swords foretold that only one person could survive this battle. Before, Rollo might not have been a match for Ragnar, but ever since Ragnar took opium, his physical condition had greatly declined. They looked like they were punching each other back and forth, but it was obvious Ragnar's condition was worse. He could barely clench his fists. Seeing Ragnar at a disadvantage, Lagertha rushed up regardless of everything, wanting to save him, but in a moment of inattention, she fell into a desperate situation. Fortunately, Bjorn went over in time to save his mother's life. At the same time, a hook pulled Ragnar out of the melee. After removing the hook, Ragnar saw the fallen Lagertha. He immediately told Bjorn to carry Lagertha onto the ship. Perhaps it was because he had been too absorbed in fighting Rollo just now. Only at this moment did Ragnar notice the Parisians had completely gained the upper hand. With the two sides having similar numbers, the Parisian soldiers with a stronger will to survive displayed greater combat power. They caught Vikings and went on a killing spree. Seeing the situation was lost, Ragnar immediately ordered the ropes binding the carrier to be cut, letting everyone abandon ship and escape. He then picked up an axe, intending to settle life and death with Rollo, but just as he was about to rush towards Rollo, two men tackled Ragnar and carried him onto the departing ship.
No! Enough! Let them go!
With the Vikings' departure, the Battle of the Seine River once again ended with the Parisians' victory. Afterwards, the heavily wounded Rollo returned to the city of Paris. People welcomed him like a hero lining the streets. Princess Gisela stepped forward and embraced and kissed Rollo. From this moment, she truly accepted Rollo from the bottom of her heart. King Charles placed the laurel on Rollo's head and made him general in command of the three armies in Otto's place. Rollo drew his sword and thanked God in French.
Deus! Charist! Paris!
This also declared that Rollo was renouncing the Viking gods and beginning to believe in the Franks' deities. In stark contrast were the Vikings, who suffered a crushing defeat and could only flee in panic. In this great battle, Lagertha miscarried again due to her injuries, and Ragnar directly chose to leave the Kattegat Strait forever. King Ragnar, who had disappeared for several years, returned to his kingdom once again. The Kattegat Strait had now transformed from a poor little fishing village into a prosperous trade hub. Faced with Ragnar's return, the people's eyes no longer held the worship and reverence of the past. Instead, they were filled with loathing and contempt. A large crowd surrounded Ragnar, pointing and whispering. Among them were even Ragnar's sons, who had grown into adults. Seeing his sons' cold gazes and the swords in their hands, eager to be tested, Ragnar understood their intentions. In the Viking tribe, whoever could slay the previous king could sit on the throne and become the sole ruler. Ragnar was deeply pained. He didn't know what he had done wrong to make all his subjects hate him, even to the point that his own sons were drawing swords against him. But he didn't intend to find out the reason. He wanted to ask who had the guts to kill him and become the only king here.
Who wants to be king?
You want to be king, Umba. Kill me, and you are king.
King Umba! What are you waiting for?
Are you afraid? Be a man.
With Ragnar's overwhelmingly powerful aura, the people present all obediently watched, not daring to move. His second son Ub, not resigned, still walked up with his sword. But after all, blood is thicker than water. In the end, Ub still didn't have the courage to strike his father. Just then, his eldest son Bjorn walked over.
Why did you come back?
A few sons called Ragnar into the woods for a struggle session. Bjorn also explained to his father the reason the people hated him. It turned out that ever since Ragnar had left the Kattegat without a word several years ago, this place had been jointly managed by Bjorn and Aslog. During this time, an envoy from another territory came here and brought two very important pieces of news. Their lord had gone to raid the kingdom of Wessex in England last year and even spent the winter there. They heard that Quenthrith had given birth to a son for Ragnar named Magnus, who now lived in Ecgbert's capital. In addition, they also learned that the tribespeople Ragnar had left in Wessex to farm had been slaughtered. To warn Ragnar, Ecgbert had even specially left one person alive to bring a message to Ragnar. It was obvious that Ragnar definitely knew about this matter. The reason the people were now filled with hatred for Ragnar wasn't just because of the defeat in the invasion of Paris, but also because Ragnar had concealed the fact that the settlement in England had been massacred. Bjorn didn't understand why Ragnar had come back. Ragnar said he missed them, so he came back to see them. Of course, most importantly, he wanted them to join him in going to England for revenge.
What do you say, Bitte? Uber? Sigurd? I can see in your eyes that your answer is also no.
Bjorn indicated he had no interest in England. He took out a map of the Mediterranean. This was obtained during the invasion of Paris. On this map was the Roman Empire that Bjorn had been thinking about.
And places and towns. I want to go there! How far along are you with your plans? Floki is building the boats. Witzek has agreed to come with me as well as King Harald and his brother.
Ragnar asked his fourth son Sigurd Snake and Ub why they didn't go together. Ub said the Kattegat Strait was now a trade hub. Many people coveted this place. He and Sigurd had to stay at home to protect their mother, because his youngest son Ivar the Boneless was congenitally disabled. Ragnar didn't ask for his opinion. After bidding farewell to his father, Bjorn found the seer. The seer told Bjorn that Ragnar's return, with his glory gone, would only bring endless death and war, but the seer didn't say who would die.
Then tell me this. What calamity will befall us?
Not one calamity, but calamities too many to number. Now that your father has come back, you are happy to see him, I'm sure. But in truth, you should curse the day.
At the same time, Ragnar found Floki. He hoped Floki could go to England with him, but Floki said he had already agreed to Bjorn first and couldn't go back on his word. Ragnar had no choice but to unwillingly accept this reality. Under the setting sun, Ragnar bared his heart to this old friend. He said he had a feeling that if they didn't sail together this time, they would never have the chance to meet again.
I love you.
What they didn't know was that this parting would truly be forever. After leaving Floki's residence, Ragnar went to Hedeby again to persuade Lagertha. Lagertha now liked a woman. She also kept an owl. Seeing Ragnar arrive, Lagertha felt both joy and sorrow. Joy because she still loved Ragnar in her heart, and sorrow because Ragnar had concealed the matter of the Wessex settlement. Ragnar hoped Lagertha would go to England with him, but Lagertha refused, because that wasn't what she wanted to do. The once devoted husband and wife sat like this quietly. Ragnar said how good it would be if they had never left their previous farm. That way, they could have loved each other, stayed together, and accompanied each other for life. But some things, once missed, could never be returned to. The next day, Lagertha quietly watched Ragnar leave. Tears had long moistened Lagertha's eyes. Astrid walked over and asked Lagertha if she really didn't want to go with Ragnar.
I'm never totally sure about my feelings for Ragnar. I imagine that many women feel the same way as I do. Not wanting and wanting.
Lagertha replied. Ragnar left Hedeby in low spirits. For him now, it's the equivalent of all his relatives abandoning him. Ragnar walked through the entire Viking tribe. Not a single person was willing to believe him or support him. Since that was the case, he might as well die and be done with it. He tied a rope to a tree, intending to end his remaining life just like this.